Hello, everybody. This is Debo with Debo's Movie Reviews here, and today I'm going to review Black Widow, starring Scarlett Johansson as Natasha Romanoff, aka the Black Widow, in her ninth and final outing, which this one she was also executive producer of, alongside Florence Pugh as Yelena Belova, alongside Rachel Weisz as Belina Vostokov, aka Iron Maiden, alongside David Harbour as Red Guardian, alongside I meant to say, I meant to say Ray Winstone as General Groykov, alongside Olga Kurylenko as the Taskmaster. I gotta say, in comparisons between Black Widow and the movies compared to the comics, I can say, kind of portrayal wise, great casting, but sort of flawed in the movie wise because of how he didn't really do the whole thing in the comics, like in the comics where she was a super soldier, so, trained with given serum, part of our Red Room training in the comics, compared to, although that's kind of been noticed in the movies as well, but not as acknowledged as it is in the comics, compared to a lot of differences in the comics, to where in the comics Taskmaster is a mercenary named Tony Masters. In the movie, she's the disfigured daughter of General Dreykov named Antonia, which is pretty much the similarities there in the gender, but great use of gender swap. Because like I say, movie Taskmaster is just female Snake Eyes in a way. Like how in the comics, Yelena Belova was a villain who took over the mantle of Black Widow after Natasha's defection to the U.S. and to the Avengers, whereas in the movie they're sisters. Like how in the comics, Red Guardian and Natasha were boyfriend and girlfriend, and eventually married. In the movie, Red Guardian's her father. Like how Melina Vostokov, also a villain, who went by the moniker Iron Maiden, also a villain, but in the comics, but in the movie, her so-called mother. I gotta admit, it's kind of like a movie that had more family values than the Fast and Furious franchise. And I love a bit of a change. Is almost like a missed opportunity to bring in X-Men, because in the comics, Black Widow Natasha was trained in hand-to-hand combat by Wolverine while he was undercover spying on the Russians during the war. Or should I say before the war anyway. And then you had Winstone as General Dreykov, and it's kind of surprising that how he's the second person that was in Sexy Beast who was an MCU villain, where Ben Kingsley was the fake Mandarin in Iron Man 3, but enough of that for now. But great story overall, and among the take on the movie version of Black Widow, from how it goes in the flashbacks to the Red Room, like how an Age of Ultron had, and a great change of how Yelena is now is a hero in the movie, but a villain in the comics, who was more anti-heroine, and a lot more brutal than Natasha was. Like how I've already mentioned about how the fake parents were in the comics were a lover and straight up villain. But excellent take, and I gotta give it to the late great William Hurt, R.I.P. as Thunderbolt Ross. Wonder how they're gonna introduce the Thunderbolts now, since he's passed on. Although I kind of suggest they should bring back Sam Elliott, who was in the Eric Bana Hulk, who played Ross in that timeline, and just make Thunderbolts in a multiverse part of in another multiverse thing. But enough about that. Back to Black Widow, and I gotta say, great storyline of how she in the events that took place between the events of Infinity War and Civil War, to where Black Widow or Natasha's on the run from Secretary of State Ross, who of course was, in my opinion, the real villain of Civil War, breaking up the Avengers and such. But I digress about that because if you want more on my take on that, watch my Civil War review. And I gotta give it back to Black Widow, to where it starts from where she's escaping from General Ross to Norway, hangs out in the trailer, watching watching with her friend Rick, who we don't. It was a great performance by that guy. I can't really pronounce his last name, but great guy, great role, and how he helped Natasha hide out until Red Room got a hold of her after Yelena gets this serum, which breaks her programming, and then she yanks that chip out and while on a mission, and then she sends Natasha these photos, these cases of the vials of serum that sent to her for safekeeping, but she hides. Of course, Taskmaster finds her, and then get that old scene at the bridge after Nat's powers go out watching Moonraker, which kind of fits in similarities between how General Dreykov and Hugo Drax was, because they both had, except that at least Dreykov didn't have to do space like Drax did. Which, if you want to know more about Moonraker, I got a review on that too. But hey, kind of one that's out of all the Bond movies she picked to know word for word and all. But hey, kind of fitting to acknowledge Bond in the Marvel universe, given how you could pretty much say her and Peggy Carter are pretty much the MCU's equivalent to a female Bond. And a lot of great action, kind of like from the beginning of the movie where they get cornered at that airport, with an excellent performance by Ever Anderson, daughter of Mila Jovovich, and Paul W.S. Anderson as young Natasha. And of course, then there's back to the scene in that apartment complex in Budapest, where Nat and Yelena are reunited, and then they had that kick-ass fight scene, and then a chase scene with a motorcycle to the BMW SUV, while with Taskmaster in that APC. And I gotta give an excellent line from that bridge ambush, to where I'm a better shot when I'm pissed off line. Classic. Best line, one of the best lines of the movie, along with her. Yelena's going to poke fun at Natasha's pose, and she's always going, such a poser. I gotta say, Florence Pugh knocked it out of the park and perfectly cast, along with Harbor, but as Red Guardian, which kind of makes sense to him going Russian after the end of Stranger Things, where Chief Harper gets kidnapped by the Cade Russians and sent to one of their black sites, and then they only get liberated now to back to Lord Black Widow, where they pull like another Mission Impossible style scenario, which kind of reenacted beginning of Ghost Protocol with Red Guardian escaping that prison, and Yelena and Natasha go ahead and just go in there and just liberate the hell out of that prison, just taking out those guards and all. And woof, from handling that helicopter to Yelena knocking out that guard tower, and oof, and they had the whole reunion with Belena, who I mentioned, kind of perfect fitting casting given she's in real life married to Daniel Craig, who until last year was Bond, and then you got for to do a movie that's technically a nod to Bond, the spy movies and all. And one of the great and like I say, this is one of the more female centered ones like Salt and CIA Codename Alexa, which will get future reviews. But back to Black Widow. And I gotta mention the excellent use of the song American Pie for soundtrack, and that alternate cover, of Explosion Like Teen Spirit, which kind of fitted, but even though I don't believe no one, even though I still say the original's better, but still. And then of course you get the final showdown between Dreykov and the whole reveal of how, and the whole Budapest thing was finally, which from Avengers to from first Avengers, Age of Ultron to Endgame, all had that whole gag between Hawkeye and Black Widow in Budapest, and I'm surprised Jeremy Renner didn't have at least a cameo in it, even for the flashback scene of the first assassination attempt against Dreykov, which of course created Taskmaster, because wearing a Taskmaster in the comic was a male villain, but and in the movie gender swapped to a Snake Eyes ripoff. To highlight how it is to where a bunch of non-Russian actors playing Russians, and then the only actual Russian doesn't get no speaking lines. But back to Florence Pugh, and the excellent post credit which led up to the Hawkeye thing, and where, of course, in the Hawkeye series on Disney Plus had like an excellent flight scenes where Valerie, who played by Julia Louis-Dreyfus, tricks her into thinking that Clint killed Natasha, only to find out that she sacrificed herself. But overall, I'm gonna have to give at least Black Widow at least a 4.5. I kind of thought it should have been R-rated, but then again, Black Widow was more of a James Bond type of spy instead of a John Wick. But overall, I hope y'all like, subscribe, and enjoy, and I'm done.